Okay, it's 2 o'clock according to me, so let's start this session. Mrs. Truman. Ms. Truman.
Thank you, Inspector. I'm just struggling getting one of our participants in, Mr. Sargent. He says he's in the waiting area, but I can't.
Oh, right.
I've just sent him a link as well. So
possibly, do you think he might have clicked on the link for a different session?
Possibly, I thought that, but then I've resent the link. So unless I've sent the wrong one again, so I just thought I'd let you know.
Okay, thank you.
I'll try and sort it out with him via email.
Yeah. If I don't, if I don't come back to you, thank you very much for sorting that out in the background, and indeed for everything that you and the council have done on all these sessions so far. It's worked really well from my perspective. But if I don't come back to you, do update me in a few minutes. Just put your hand up, and we'll see what's happened with that. But I won't go too far until that stage.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you all for being here. We are live. We are being recorded and on Teams, and also streamed to the council's YouTube channel. Can everyone see and hear me? I will take silence as a yes. Mrs. Barrett.
There's a gentleman also waiting in the lobby, Mark. Well, it's Dr. Doggett. I've tried to admit him, but it says admission failed.
Yeah, I've got that as well.
So, it says admit failed as well. So there's possibly two people now who are awaiting.
Okay, well let's do it. Thank you. I will take a little bit of time. Now, I know both those individuals have been at previous sessions, so the introductory bits and pieces that I'll go through now will be of no surprise or I suspect particular interest to them. But we'll check in a couple of minutes, see if those things can be resolved in the background. That'll be brilliant. Just on that note, is there anyone here that hasn't been to a previous session? I suppose I'm just keen to focus our time as much as possible on looking at this session being down on INSP. Dr. Doggett, that looks good. I can see you in now.
Thank you. Yes, I am.
Good. I hadn't really said anything of any particular interest up until that stage. Now there was another individual who, the program officer. Yes, Kerry. Has that, Mr. Sargent, has that been resolved?
No, not as yet. I'm just going to try and contact him by telephone to see.
Thank you. Yeah.
Resolve that.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll keep going, but it looks like, and please do use the raise hand function if you haven't been in an earlier session. Mr. Morrison. Okay. Anyone else? Right. Well, then I'll just quickly go through the opening. It's probably a good idea to do that anyway. But effectively, thank you all for being here. We are going to come on to examination document INSP 5B. We're now on the afternoon session. On the Thursday, the final session there. This is paragraph 69 to 71 onwards. Now, this is a bit of a general session. I've put down a few things. We may not need to go through all those things, as the discussion so far has been quite full, and I've personally found it fuller perhaps than were we in a physical hearing. But we'll see how we go on those things. Part of this session is, though, for you to ask any questions of me, any points of clarification, anything to do with timing and process. So I will be quiet at some point, and you can raise any questions like that you would wish. But we've got a couple of things to get through before then. So yes, many of you will be familiar with proceedings. I'm Tom Bristow, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination and to prepare a report, ultimately with recommendations to the Council. We're going to look, as I mentioned, at document INSP 5B. We're going to look at various other documents on the examination library that is administered by the Programme Officer, Kerry Truman, who you heard speaking a minute ago. It's on the Council's website. It might be useful to have that in front of you along with the 2012 version of the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Excellent. Thank you. Good. Thanks. I'm glad you got in, Mr. Sergeant. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
I was just doing a few bits and pieces in terms of administration and housekeeping, and I was mentioning that we'd be going off the final 3 paragraphs of examination document INSP 5B, and I was saying how it might be useful if everyone has that in front of them, and indeed the examination library, because the other documents to which we'll be making reference in particular, given that we're dealing with potential main modifications. So those are modifications that I may ultimately recommend be made to the plan in order that it represents a sound strategy, and the tests of soundness insofar as they relate to this plan being in paragraph 182 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2012. There's a fair amount of detail, there's a fair amount of history to the examination, so please, as I've said in previous sessions, do stop me, do interject, do put your hand up if anything is unclear. This is the opportunity for you to say what you would like within reason. Could I just ask that as that has helpfully highlighted, and that wasn't a scripted intervention, as Mr. Sergeant has just done, if you keep your microphones muted when you're not talking. There's guidance on the examination website, also on data privacy and on virtual hearings, INSP 22, INSP 23 and INSP 24. Do have a look at those documents if you haven't already. I will generally summarise what I see to be the key matters, so we make best use of our time. Any questions, put them to me in the first instance rather than any form of cross-examination. If you want to raise a particular point, use the raise hand, the palm icon on your toolbar, and I'll come round to you. As I mentioned initially, this is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, and it's also being recorded on Teams, where it will be kept for a little while in line with those data handling documents I mentioned earlier. So just be mindful not to share any personal information, whether it's yours or others, and for example, holding stuff up on the screen or saying bits and pieces. I think it works best, as everyone has done, if your camera is off. But appear when you're talking, or at least turn your microphone on, and let me know who you are at that point or your particular interest. I'm planning on, well, we'll see where we go. Actually, I'm not going to say that we'll necessarily need a break. We may not, but if we go on beyond about an hour and a half, I'll probably have a break to gather my thoughts. Once when we're in a break, you can leave at any time, of course, by pressing the red icon on the toolbar, the red leave symbol, and that won't affect the proceeding for others. But during a break, if you do want to stay in the session to avoid having to kind of come out and rejoin, just keep yourself muted, and we will come back. The recording will continue, and we'll come back after the break. But the time to hang up is after the session is done. As previously, we won't be using the chat function in Teams. In the event that anyone does that, I won't look at it. I will be looking around at people, some notes, trying to find some documents, etc. I'll try and keep as much eye contact as possible, but please don't be offended if I'm looking around or looking a bit distracted. I will be listening. It's great that the Council and the Programme Officer are there to deal with any technical matters. I think it's all worked relatively well, and I'm confident that they can deal with anything that crops up. what I've said in previous sessions is, given the amount of evidence I have and the time of the examination, it may not be necessary to cover each and every matter that I've identified. If you are happy, if you're here and you're happy for me to rely on your written representations, just let me know that. That's fine. There's no difference in terms of the weight that I accord to anything, however a view reaches me. And I may, of course, stop things if I've heard enough. Don't take offence at that. And part of the process is, of course, listening to the issues, clarifying matters, rather than delivering a finding on a particular matter here. The examination only concludes when my report is with the council, and there will be the opportunity for further comment on potential main modifications, which we are going to discuss now. So any questions, any points, any matters that are not there on the agenda? Mr. Best.
Thank you, sir. Just to make you aware, and apologies for the lateness, but following yesterday's session, a number of the participants sought to come up with an alternative wording of MM35 to assist you, and we have just sent that through in the last few minutes, having reached a degree of agreement on it. We obviously were working with urgency to get it to you before now, and I regret to say it has only just been sent in the last few minutes.
Okay.
So I don't know when we get to that point, if we've sent it to Kerry, and hopefully Kerry can forward on to you. We've also sent a copy to Ms Barrett as well. So just to alert you to that when we get to that particular point in the proceedings. I've also separately, just under the heading, the name of Turley, sent you through Kerry a note on Coleshill Hall Hospital, which I've also copied to Ms Barrett. So again, just to make you aware, that was winging its way over to you just before the session started.
Thank you very much. And if I may just ask on that point, that's helpful. I think in one of the earlier sessions I said it's very helpful if people think about the tests of soundness and then also come up with suggestions as to how things could be rendered sound. And I take it that's the context in which you have worked with others on that MM.
Yes,
so thank you for that. What degree of agreement is there?
Well, it's a proposed wording of MM35 that is agreed between Barton Willmore, ourselves and Savills.
Okay, so
three of the participants.
Between those participants, not necessarily with the council. So we'll see.
No, not yet. No,
okay.
We can't chance to do that. We tried to turn it around within the time.
Yeah. Oh no. Of course. Yeah. No. I just wanted to check that I wasn't thinking it was something other than it was. So thank you very much. Okay, great. As I understand that is coming round, and of course that will need to go on the examination website at some point, whether that is in the schedule of main modifications or otherwise. But we will come to that probably second. So that's a helpful clarification. Thank you, Mr. Best. Are there any other points that people wanted to make at this stage? Mrs. Barrett.
It was just an item in the news, I think it was either yesterday or today, about the household projections 2018. And that the government has decided that they're not going to use the 2018 household projections. So it was just to make you aware that that's in the offering. So and it was just to make. I haven't seen anything on any formal sites yet, but as far as I'm aware, that is coming through.
All right. Well, that's yes. That's a bit of a curveball. That might, if that is the case, and I haven't seen that, I must admit, if that is the case, that might have saved us a little bit of time at examination. But no, joking aside, we did consider both the substance and the procedure in relation to the 2018 based household projections. So although that's potentially relevant in terms of context, I think that's helpful to note, but I think in terms of anything specifically on that, I've probably heard what I need to in the context of this examination. But thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Mr. Best, I see your hand is up again. That may just be a legacy hand, as I call them. I don't know if that's a formal term, but there we are. Any other Any other points that people would raise at this stage, or else I will go to, well, I'm thinking actually, what I might do, because some of the people here were not at the previous session, and I have been keeping a list of actions. No, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud. I was wondering if it might actually focus what we're doing to go through those actions now, but I think what I will do is I'll go through the particular points. I'll stick with INSP5B I've got, and then we'll go through those more administrative things later, and I won't be at all offended if anyone does decide that at that point they want to depart from proceedings. So I thought, to start with, we should turn specifically to potential main modifications, or MMs. Now, it may be that some people have ones that I haven't identified here, but what I've tried to do, in addition to the themes that we've talked about, and I do have made a note on certainly my version in terms of dealing with additional local consultation and sustainability appraisal under paragraph 70. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to pick out particular main modifications that individuals have raised, just to discuss those points here. If, of course, when we come to the end of paragraph 69, there are other main modifications that on review individuals feel like they want to raise a point on, I'll of course hear them. I'd like to hear, obviously, from the council what they think about the current schedule we're working towards. But let's start then. The first one I had, and this is all referring to document NWBC 20E, which is the most recent schedule. The first one I had was in relation to MM16. Which we may, as I had it, sorry, I'm having to cross-reference between quite a few documents, which relates to policy LP1, it seems. As I had that down, that was a point made by Prologis. But I believe that was, sorry, I'm just looking through all my notes. I believe that was the position that the plan would be unsound without expressing employment requirements as a minima, as we have arrived at through that potential main modification. I take that as a point. Does anyone want to comment on that? Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, sir. I think I'm just checking my own notes, actually, sir, of what I've said in relation to MM16. I think from my representation, the key point that I was making there is one for clarification. The policy as modified at the end of the first paragraph refers to applications being determined in accordance with the presumption in favour of sustainable development in the NPPF. And it struck me that there was room for confusion here or interpretation because, as we know, the policies are being brought forward, or plans being brought forward against the 2012 NPPF. But I thought that in the context of decision making, the plan should be current. And therefore that reference to the NPPF ought to be to the 2019 NPPF rather than the 2012. And in the context of decision making, there are a couple of differences between the two NPPF presumptions. I'm sure you're familiar with them, but specifically the 2019 version introduces a clarification that it's approving development proposals that accord with an up-to-date development plan. And then in relation to paragraph, that's in paragraph C, and in paragraph D, that the change is that it's where there are no relevant development plan policies or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date. So i.e. not all policies. So the point being that as my interest lies in a particular sector, and we've discussed the fact that when evidence is available, the plan would be considered out of date if it doesn't deal with it, that it's important that we're dealing with the right presumption.
Yes, I see that point. I think, yes, this was something I was reflecting on, and I think this is something the council separately raised. And there was a suggestion, so I'll put this to Mr. Rouse first, and then I'll come back to the council if this is incorrect, that reference should be made to the latest version of the NPPF. So not necessarily to the NPPF 2019, because of course that may change over time, but it would be to the latest version of the NPPF in that context.
Well, that's an interesting question, sir, because I've had legal advice on that previously, that a plan can't make policy reference to a document that doesn't yet exist in those terms. But and therefore, if a plan makes reference to an NPPF or a national document or whatever, that you take it to be the one that was current at the time the plan was adopted. But I that may not be, sacrosanct. So I don't much mind. I suppose I'm happy to accept that. That's fine. I just think that it's trying to put clarity in where we can. That's all.
I see what you mean. Yes, and of course, I don't know when and what will come out in terms of a future version. So no, I see your point in terms of clarity. Yes, I'm stumbling a little bit. Can I go to the council on this review?
If I can help, sir. When we originally did the plan, I think the submission version actually does say NPPF 2012, but when we were going through the hearings, there was this talk about that because it's in the transitional arrangements, it's being considered as part of the 2012, but with a nod to understanding that the decision-taking part of it is possibly going to be under the newest or new part of the NPPF. So I think what we'd come to some sort of agreement about was that we'd drop the date of the NPPF and just say it is compliant to the NPPF, because whoever is the decision maker at that time will have to take account of the relevance and outdatedness of any of the policies throughout the whole of the local plan and anything else that is material to that decision.
Yeah. So I mean, from what I'm hearing, there doesn't seem to be anything between either of you really. It's just about how that's expressed, isn't it? And I'm wondering if this is something. So you're right. The basis of the examination is the NPPF 2012 in terms of the local plan. Clearly, the NPPF 2019 is relevant as it informs decision taking, and this is a decision-taking policy that directs someone as to how they would apply that presumption. So I can see the logic in, as you've said, Mrs. Barrett, referring to the latest version of the NPPF there. But perhaps what I would suggest is MM16 refers to the latest version of the NPPF, and that's clarified in terms of the justification. So that hopefully avoids the point Mr. Rouse raised, that it's referring to something that might hypothetically or might not exist in the future.
Can I just check that, sir? Because if the plan itself is written to be in accordance with the 2012 plan, if we refer in that policy to the latest NPPF and there's any differences to explain why things have happened, shouldn't it just be to the NPPF that we refer? But so we're not actually saying that no, maybe I'm.
No,
I'm removing. I'm talking out loud now. Sorry, sir.
Well, I mean, it may just be a case of putting it in line with the presumption of. I mean, other inspectors I know, and Mr. Rouse will know as well, would sort of strike out a policy that simply repeats national policy on the grounds that it's unnecessary, and presumably you do get into this sort of situation. So that's one option. Another option, personally, I'm not of the view that repeating national policy, provided it's consistent with national policy, is a matter of soundness for me to get embroiled with the plan, provided those references are consistent. I suppose that the issue of soundness comes in if actually the presumption that is proposed via a certain policy is slightly differently phrased to the presumption. So it may just be a case of actually less is more. Applications will be determined in accordance with the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And then someone in decision taking would go, well, the presumption in favour of sustainable development is the one that's in the NPPF 2012, and you don't have to embroil yourself in the NPPF 2019. Sorry, and you don't have to embroil yourself with those discussions. So maybe less is more.
Yes, sir. Yeah, happy with that.
Mr. Rouse?
Well, I suppose so, yes. I mean, it leaves it open, doesn't it, in terms of someone picking up the plan in the future and thinking which NPPF we were talking about, but you generally would seek to apply the default position most people would do is refer to the current NPPF. As I say, I think you could be wrong in doing that, and you should refer to the one that was current at the time the plan was adopted. But where you've got transitional arrangements that have you instruct that the plan should be brought forward in accordance with the old NPPF, or two versions ago, there is a recipe for confusion, I would have thought, in there, and I thought clarity and precision might be helpful. I can fight that battle another day. That's fine, but just if there's room for clarification, it might be beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
At the end of the day, so we don't mind.
Okay. Let me have a think about that. I'm coming to the view that the problem words are just 3 in there in the NPPF. So which version? So the presumption in favour of sustainable development is a concept that applies to decision taking at the point a decision is taken. So that to me might resolve the issue. So yeah, I think on that one certainly have a reflect on that, but strike out those last few words. And if you want to add something in the justification, that's fine. But as I say, I think other inspectors have taken a slightly harder line that there's no need to repeat it, but I can't see any harm in repeating it, provided it's clear. So, okay, thank you. So I'll just, sorry, just looking at some messages from Kerry, thank you. I'll just write a note of that. Okay, thank you. So I can't see any more hands up. If we turn to the next potential main modification, that's MM35 in the schedule. Just bear with me while I get that. So this was the point that there was a new version, was there not, as explained by Mr. Best. So let me just make sure I've got that in front of me. So this is a version that should be on the examination website or should ultimately feature on it. Mr. Best, could I ask you to talk us through that one, please, rather than me potentially fumbling around for a while trying to compare and contrast?
Yes, I mean, if I can just, by way of intro, repeat what I said earlier, which is, since we discussed this yesterday, and I know that you asked the council to go away and think about perhaps some of the reason justification for the policy. A number of us decided to have a look at the 3 different versions that exist and see if we could come up with one version that we from the private sector were comfortable with, appreciating that we didn't have time to share it with the council in advance. So I accept it is therefore a private sector promoted alternative wording. And I'd also mention that we sought for that to be an agreement between 4 parties, but simply in the time available, it wasn't possible to get all of us on board. So Hodgetts Estates, who are on this session, I think we got close to agreeing, but didn't quite agree with them, and therefore I appreciate they won't have seen the final version that you have in front of you. I'm happy to forward that separately by email to them directly if that helps for the purposes of any discussion. And for anybody else who might not have seen it, who might want to comment on it, I'm just mindful of that before we start talking about it. So would you?
Okay, well, I mean, thank you for putting that question to me. I mean, that's a question for Mr. Hodgetts. I'm very conscious I haven't done the roll call this time, but that's because we have so many individuals here. It would have taken up much of the session. So, Mr. Hodgetts, would you have you seen that latest version? I mean, this is perhaps strictly stepping slightly beyond my remit, but Mr. Best has offered to send it to you to guide our discussions, and in that context, it's a helpful aid, isn't it, to have something in front of us rather than to talk in the abstract. But Mr. Hodgetts, what do you think about that?
No, very much would welcome it, sir. And I was literally just drafting an email to Sue requesting it. So
okay.
If Mike could send it, that'd be great. And I'll if you could copy in Mr. Han, Mr. Lever, and I say Mr. Hodgetts as well. But that being my brother Edward, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, fine. I'm just in the process of doing that, so apologies whilst I...
No.
I would have done it sooner had I had chance before the session started.
Okay, thank you.
There, right. I have just send that through. Oh.
Sorry, I am here.
Right, yeah, I just wasn't sure whether you were still.
No, I'm afraid my voice is failing me, so I. Okay, yes, I am here. Sorry.
Fine. Okay. Well, I hope it holds out for the rest of the afternoon. So, so would you just like me to just briefly introduce the joint proposal?
Yes, please. Yeah. And if possible, the difference with the current version that we have, yes, which is in MM35. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think the 3 of us, and that's ourselves, Barton Wilmore and Prologis, Savills on behalf of Prologis, felt that obviously the version that is presented in NWBC 20E as the council's version of MM35 was clearly a rewording or a very much edited down version of that originally put forward by Barton Wilmore, as Mr. Sitch said yesterday, in roughly, I think it was August 2018, so quite an early stage in the process. That version was obviously before you, those earlier hearings, and then obviously the version that has become MM35 was produced by the council more recently, and obviously is the one before you. We then provided an alternative version of that in our representations of October 2020, which is ALP 43. And so what we've done is sought to find a middle ground between the Barton Wilmore version and the Turley version, which we feel is a more robust policy and will make the plan sound, because we feel that there are deficiencies with the council's version. I think we had a discussion yesterday about significant weight versus looked favourably upon, for instance. So we've tried to address that. So this starts with significant weight, for instance. It refers to the study and or a successor study in determining there being an immediate need, and therefore we feel an exceptions policy should be dealing with something which is exceptional. And then we've identified a series of criteria which the council's criteria, I think, only really referred to access and not impacting on nearby residents. And we again felt that was for the purposes of you finding the plan sound, perhaps not going far enough for a policy of this nature. So we have added in a number of other criteria, which are broadly those contained in the original Barton Wilmore version and or the more recent Turley version, and sort of brought together in one place. So we've got a criterion around being located within Area A of the 2015 study, which is criterion A. B, we've cross-referred to the strategies that I referred to yesterday, the local industrial strategy. Of course, there's the strategic economic plan and the council's own economic development strategies. So I think they have to be read together, and picking up on what you were just discussing on the previous point with Mr. Rouse. Clearly, those strategies may change, but clearly at the time a decision is taken, it would be the relevant local industrial strategy or strategic economic plan at that time. And also in the latter part of criterion B, referencing contribution to economic growth, productivity and skills, which is again picking up on one of the legs of the policy in the original MM35 produced by the council. And then the remaining three criteria are one relating to accessibility, and we've brought together both access in terms of the access to the highway network, but also connectivity in terms of public transport accessibility, which we know is important in making sites as sustainable as possible. Then a criterion around other characteristics the site should have if it's going to be an exceptional site. So that would be about it being adequately served by the likes of power, delivering other gains in terms of green infrastructure and other sustainability credentials. And then finally, picking up on the council's criterion around impact, we've referred to unreasonably detrimental to health and living conditions of neighbouring residents unless adequately mitigated. And then the final rider is again the thing I think we were discussing on the session yesterday, which was how we tie it in with policy LP3 and whether or not very special circumstances would be proven. And again, we've tried to cross-reference significant weight that this policy would attach, which would clearly then have to be considered in the light of very special circumstances should the site be in the green belt.
Thank you. That's a very clear explanation. It's interesting that in some respects I see what that proposes as making clearer what would make a site exceptional. Yes. And then tying it in, well, that point around looked favourably upon versus significant weight is made consistent relative to the version we were talking about. And then there is a specific reference, which I believe I will ask clearly Mrs. Barrett for her comments after perhaps I have heard from Mr. Han and Mr. Hodgetts about the interaction with LP3, which sets out that that consideration in terms of significant weight will also apply in an assessment of whether very special circumstances exist in terms of the green belt, noting, as we discussed previously, that Area A is I'm not sure all of it, but a significant proportion of Area A in the West Midlands study is within the green belt in any event. So thank you very much. That's very clear, very helpful. Now, if I may turn to Mr. Han, I think I saw your hand up first. And so I'm just briefly going to turn my video off. I will be listening, though, just to have a good cough.
Okay, do you want me to give you a moment? Okay, I'll give you a moment.
Thank you. I'm back.
Thank you. I think we're liaising with Mr. Best and others in order to try and come up with agreed wording. As Mr. Best suggested, we didn't quite get there in time-wise. So we have a similarly amended version of wording. I don't know whether you'd find it helpful for us to circulate that to you or to talk around the wording which Mr. Best has just talked through. Conscious of having too many versions of wording floating around can be confusing.
I think that is part of the history to this MM's this potential main modification. So if it is possible, and presumably now you have seen the version that Mr. Best was referring to, if it is possible to flag up any differences in opinion there, and then I'll turn to the council for their view on it as a potential update to the MM we have in the latest schedule. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
So on the first paragraph, we don't have many significant differences. I think our wording is slightly different insofar as we talk about an immediate or exceptional strategic need or demand for employment land, and we also refer to that can't be met from land consented or allocated in the local plan to meet local need, because the local plan identifies sites to meet local need. So we wanted that clarification, just confirming within the policy.
Just on that point, I would say on that. Sorry, and I'm perhaps intervening too early, but I would say that. Because the policy is there expressly in terms of the evidence of, if I can call it, wider than local pressures, and reference is made to strategic employment. I'm not sure that. Well, what I'm saying is that point around local need. I think that's a very thorny issue that we've talked about repeatedly, and of course. You could interpret that multiple ways in terms of clarity. I'm not sure that's needed. I think that is sort of inherent in what the policy seeks to achieve. So
okay, with regards to the first point, criterion A, I think we are largely satisfied with that. It refers to area A of the study, which I think we discussed yesterday. So we are comfortable with that. With regards to criterion B, in our view, it ought not be so specific as to refer to those documents. We are comfortable with the reference to demonstrate significant contribution to economic growth, productivity and skills, but we don't feel it necessary to refer to the industrial strategy, economic plan or council economic development strategy, largely on the basis that those are some of the relevant documents, but not all of the relevant documents. For example, it doesn't refer to the strategic economic employment site study. And secondly, they will change, and therefore for the policy to have some longevity and be able to apply until such point as plan review, it makes sense, I think, just to remove the first sort of line and a half and start with demonstrates a significant contribution to economic growth. I think that is the key priority of delivering strategic employment, and that would be the key justification, rather than necessarily identification within those strategies which may change going forward. I think that's our view, just to sort of simplify the policy. So I'm just flicking from the screen, flicking between documents when you just seen this. So just me flick to on criterion C. I think we're generally in support of that. I think what we have suggested is where it says delivering high quality connectivity, I think we prefer delivering achievable and appropriate connectivity. And I think that comes down to, which I think is wording the council had used in its iteration of the policy. And I think that just sort of makes it more sort of applicable in terms of making decision making, whereas high quality is a more subjective and not well defined phrase, and therefore appropriate and achievable in our eyes is a more appropriate terminology. Turning to, I'm just flicking back, criterion D in our view, we just feel that that whole criterion isn't necessary insofar as it duplicates the requirements of other policies in the plan, in particular LP 31, 37 and 38. And these are detailed development management criteria, which any development that comes forward would be required to meet with. And I think when you look at the purpose of the policy, which is to meet, to provide a mechanism to deliver employment land when it's demonstrated it's required and it can't be met elsewhere, this is a level of detail of what that employment land might be, how it might be built, etc. And I think it's unnecessary for it to be in this particular policy, trying to simplify things.
Yeah, sure. Now, if I may, so I just need to be slightly careful that what I'm doing here is looking at a potential MM. I'm not necessarily examining this document for soundness. So, which I felt is kind of the direction we were going in. I'm looking at the plan and the relevance, if you see what I mean. But no, there's a valid points about its operation. I see your point on point D, that it's not in your view necessary, but not necessarily harmful. It's just reiterating what the plan says elsewhere. Is that also your point in terms of criterion E?
Hang on, let me.
Which is about living conditions.
On criterion, it could be, but I think on that criterion, as it was one which the council originally proposed, our view was it ought to refer to nearby residents, and that where the text refers to noise, vibration and visual impact, we were proposed to delete that simply because they are three relevant factors, but there are a host of other factors that could impact upon residential amenity, odour, various other traffic, air quality. There's lots of other factors. So, and again, that is dealt with through other policies in the plan. It's dealt with through LP 31. So again, the level of specificity seemed unnecessary there. That the principle of not being unduly detrimental to living conditions unless appropriate and mitigated seemed a reasonable point. But again, that whole criterion is something which is dealt with elsewhere. Okay. So in terms of its necessity, I don't think it's necessary. But we did want to make that point that if it is to be included, then by taking out those three criteria, it gives emphasis that all relevant criteria should be considered, not necessarily just those three.
Okay, and on the final sentence,
the final paragraph is perhaps where we have the I suppose greatest comments, and I think that's because we're happy with the opening sentence in terms of demonstrating a need and meeting these criteria will carry significant weight in decision taking. Now, in our view, then it needs to make reference largely to, with particular regard to, policy LP3 and policy LP5. Now, we think it's important that direct reference is given to the meaningful strategic gap policy, because land within the area there is greenbelt land within the area of Area A. There is also meaningful strategic gap land. So I think they need to be on an even footing within the policy, that when to give direction to the decision maker when determining future applications as and if they appear, that significant weight is attached to this, having regard to those other policies. I think then our view is that reference to very special circumstances warranting granting of inappropriate developments in the Greenbelt, if you start along that line of adding, effectively repeating what's in national policy there, then you would in effect then have to start adding similar references to LP5 in terms of development within the green gap. So we just think it's unnecessary by suggesting significant weight is applied in decision making with particular regard to those policies. It then takes the decision making party to those policies to read them, and they have their own tests and their own approach.
Yeah, no, I see that. Okay, Thank you. Now that's all very clear. So what I'm going to do, I think I'll hear from Mr. Hodgetts because he's got his hand up. If that's everything you wanted to say, Mr. Hand, sorry if I.
Yes, I think yeah. For now, yes.
Thank you. And then what I'll do is I will then ask the council on this. So I think that's enough to go on for the time being. And I appreciate there may be some toing and froing on this, as there has been previously, but just to reiterate, my role is to consider its relevance to the plan as submitted, not necessarily this kind of policy in itself. But anyway, Mr. Hodgetts.
Thank you, sir. I just want to make 2 points. The first one being what I understood to be the genesis of this policy, which is when Mr. Sitch, I believe, originally suggested in a statement of common ground, I believe, the original policy wording, it was the template for it was the policy in the North West Leicestershire local plan policy EC2. And I would certainly direct you to take a look at that again when you're considering your deliberations on LP6A and how it should be formed. And the second point, well, to go into that in a bit more detail, that policy, again, is predicated on immediate need or demand for additional employment land. And also then the criteria, and it's a criterion-based policy that begins with the need. The criterion are accessibility and, of course, sustainable accessibility, range of modes of transport, things we've discussed, proximity to the strategic highway network, and not being detrimental to the amenities of nearby residents. So essentially, it's very similar to that which the council have previously proposed, and I guess demonstrates that a suitable working policy in a neighbouring borough that has been successfully implemented in a local plan. And then the second point I would make is just to stress, I don't think it's been stressed quite enough to you, that if you do refer to the strategic employment, West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study, figure 4.10, where the Area A is shown, which I'm sure you will do at some stage, and probably have done already, but the whole of the meaningful gap is within Area A. It covers the entirety of that. So given that, I think that just adds weight to the fact that if the policy is going to make direct reference to LP3, i.e. Greenbelt, it should make reference to LP5 on that basis.
Thank you very much. That's, yep, very clear. Okay, now, I think that's everything I want to hear at this stage. Mrs. Barrett, do you want to, have you seen that version that Mr. Best?
We're just going through it now, sir. So, but I can give you some quick, quick response. On the one hand, which is very general. Sorry, go on.
No, if I can, no, that's helpful, but perhaps what I'll do, because there are a number of different elements to it, if I just go through what I've heard so far, and I think, and I thank everyone for coming to this with a sort of collaborative approach, but I think we're kind of, we're nearing kind of saturation point in terms of what I've heard on this, and I think it now comes to me effectively to work this out. But on the first point, as I had it, significant weight in general as a concept as opposed to look favourably on. There's no objection to that being consistent from the council in general terms.
No, sir. In LP6A, we've got the word significant weight in there, and I think yesterday we talked about taking out the wording proposal supporting economic growth would be looked upon favourably. So we were going to take out that point.
Okay, thank you. So that's good. If I look at the first paragraph of this, the interaction with policy LP2 hierarchy, is it a spatial hierarchy? Is it the council's view that such strategic employment things responding to an immediate need may legitimately come forward outside of the settlement hierarchy, or not?
Yes, sir. And I don't think so. LP2 doesn't need to be referred to because I suppose it's similar to the green belt. We just don't feel that you need to refer to the settlement hierarchy because, as we say, significant weight will be given in determining the application. So that in itself, but also if there is going to be reference to the area of search, so that would be area A, if that's the area of research, that automatically takes you to the point where that is either in the Meaningful Gap or in the green belt. So it leads you down a path anyway. So
I see. Okay, thank you. And just on that point, I'm just sort of working my way through.
Sorry, yes.
No. That's great. On that point, no objection to figure 4.10 of that study being referenced, or is there an objection to that?
No. So I think if I mean, preferably we've always said that we'd rather not have a policy, but if we are to have a policy, then it makes sense to actually refer to the area A. At least then, as we talked about yesterday, the decision taker has got a clear area of the area of research that's being looked at.
Yes, and I think I tried to explain, but perhaps didn't explain very well, that we're dealing with a kind of a potential main modification at this stage in the eventuality that a few things occur with my reasoning on the plan. So this is a sort of in the event that MM35 or some variant of it is necessary, rather than the council's position in terms of the plan as submitted. So no, I take that point. That's a good point to raise. Any thoughts about, so there was some discussion there between Mr. Han versus the version Mr. Best presented in terms of whether it is necessary or harmful to refer to the local industrial strategy or the strategic economic plan. I suppose if you do refer to those, if reference were to be made to those, we get into the same situation in terms of the NPPF 2012-2019 potentially, but equally that may help guide some form of specificity. So,
I think the one point that I would say there is that it's that the proposal should address one of the key sectors identified through those documents. So that I think is the important phrase. It's those key sectors that are the things that are being promoted and that are seen as I suppose adding to the weight of why these schemes would come forward.
Okay.
So from that point of view, I can see that adds additional weight to the fact of its uniqueness.
Okay, thank you. There was some discussion about high quality connectivity or whether it's appropriate connectivity, and whether criteria D and E of the version that Mr. Best presented were necessary in light of the other provisions of the development plan, although as we talked through, I understand they've been advanced in the sort of approach to demonstrating that something would be kind of an exception by virtue not only of the need it responds to, but how it's designed. But any comments on those criteria, Mrs. Barrett?
The suggestion that we had in LP6A was the site is reasonably accessible by a choice of means of transport. So it's that choice of modes of getting to the site is important. So because what makes it high quality? Is it that it's a nice new bus, or is it the fact that it's a frequent bus? So right. There's that sort of tension, I suppose, in terms of what is is classed as high quality, but I think a choice of modes of travel to a particular site is important.
Okay, and any views on whether that sort of thing is necessary, would be necessary to put in such a modification, or whether reading the plan as a whole that would lead you to the same outcome anyway?
We do talk about connectivity in the transport section, about walking, cycling strategies and things like that, modes of transport. But if this is going to be a large strategic site, then you would want to flag up that is an important aspect of, because if it's going to go outside of the settlement hierarchy and the overall strategy, there's got to be a means of getting there. So if that makes sense. Yeah,
no, I see that. Okay. And the last point, the interaction. So, and I did mention this in terms of something to think about, whether specific reference were needed. And the suggestion has been put by Mr. Best that it simply says that, as I understand it, not that there's any form of primacy. So not that, say, this new policy, were it to exist, would be the one to go to with no other regard to policies, or would be of a higher order of importance. But the draft that he's sent round suggests that it will carry significant weight in decision taking, including in terms of the greenbelt tests. We've heard from Mr. Han and Mr. Hodgetts that they're of the view, given Area A, that significant weight would also apply in terms of the strategic gap. Any thoughts about putting that in as a specific reference?
I did manage to speak to the head of the development control this morning about this, and because he would be a key part of the decision making process, and he was quite happy if the area A was specified, in his opinion, then that means that you're automatically indicating that it's either Greenbelt, so LP3, or LP5 that would be the other policies that would be of consideration. So automatically you are directing people to the relevant policies anyway, because you're talking about the area A. And he was saying that it would be then the tilted balance as to, well, what is the evidence then for these sites, and does that outweigh the loss of a particular greenbelt site or a meaningful a strategic gap site or whatever? And that would then be all within the planning balance at the time that the decision is taken. And as Mr. Hodgetts mentioned yesterday, I mean, with the board reports, we go through whether it's an inappropriate development first, but then we say whether it's then what weight the other evidence is to say why the Greenbelt policy perhaps takes a little less weight than it would normally do. So, and I would just say that is already there within the plan. We already do that, and so there is no need to repeat that.
Okay, thank you. And I believe there is, there is various case law that talks about consideration to the development plan as a whole, which I know you've mentioned that concept earlier. I suppose. Just one point, and then I've seen two hands up. I would like to. I think I have. I've almost reached the threshold of what I need to hear on this, but it was just one more point to explore, which. The Area A. Now, Area A does cover of other local authorities. As far as I'm aware, it's not just limited to North Warwickshire, although clearly we're dealing with the North Warwickshire plan, insofar as that is relevant. But is there any land? So I suppose without a reference to policy LP2 and LP3, it could be argued, for example, that if there is any land within the meaningful gap that is not Greenbelt or is not strategic gap, that is a preferable location and I'm not saying that is either right or wrong, I'm just clarifying, is there any land in the, just so I know the situation, in the Area A that is neither greenbelt nor meaningful gap?
I think the plan itself of 411 is relatively small in scale.
Right.
So it's a broad area. So you can actually see the word Tamworth within the Area A, but then I suppose you'd have to get a magnifying glass out to see exactly where the Area A comes to. So that would be a matter for the decision taker at that time. I'm not. Oh, Mike might know a different answer to that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tillman.
Sorry, sir. It's not particularly a different answer. It's just to clarify that there is some land within that area that is neither greenbelt nor strategic gap. Fortunately, a lot of it's been already developed because it was the land south of the A5, which has previously was part of our meaningful gap, but we lost through the appeal at Junction 10.
Yeah.
It is the land to the immediate south of that, which comprises predominantly the small settlement of Freesley. I think it's Freesley. Doesn't have a development boundary. Then an area of agricultural land and a large garden centre and open fields that link up to the greenbelt, and the greenbelt boundary at that point is the road to Woodend and the railway line that leads to the freight transfer station at Bridge Coppice. So there is a chunk of land, and similarly on the western side of Tamworth, there is the site that has a partial outstanding consent for residential, but the remaining area of land between the residential just north of Overwoods Road and the Century Industrial Estate at Tamworth, that is also neither greenbelt nor strategic gap.
Okay.
That's my understanding. There may be a little bit more on the western side of Tamworth and Lichfield area, but predominantly it will be similar to this. It's the remnant parts between greenbelt and settlement boundaries that exists.
Thank you. Very helpful clarification. Now, I see some hands have gone up. Mr. Hodgetts first, Mr. Rouse second, Mr. Sitch third. And if I could ask, please, for succinct comments, that would be fantastic. And then Mr. Best. So, Mr. Hodgetts.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Oh, sorry. Yes, yeah. Well, let's go for Edward.
Okay. Sorry. Good afternoon, sir. I'll keep it very brief. I just in relation to D, and you may already be minded, along with the council, just to believe that's captured by LP 31, 37, and 38. But I just wanted to flag up. It's not necessarily sort of a planning point, but it could be a problem if this, as worded, were to go into policy, and that the site should be capable of being adequately served by power and digital technology. It's well publicised that power is one of the key drivers for occupiers, and it's offered on a first come first served basis. So you may well have two competing sites. One is preferred on all other planning grounds, but that has secured the power, and should. And it will be able to argue, according to this, that because it has secured the power with an enhanced payment, that the other sites can't come forward. So there's a real risk with that what you're actually going to do, or what will happen, is that there'll be potentially 10, 12 applications to the power authority to ransom other sites, and I say that as working in the industry and understanding the operators that are in there, although we are on the smaller scale of that, so it's not really something we would do. The only other point I had, sir, is in relation to in relation to Greenbelt. I think David Hodgetts touched on it. The genesis of this MM is from the North West Leicestershire District Council local plan, and obviously it's now been brought into our local plan, and that's been precedents for why we could have one in this local plan. And in principle, I think we agree broadly with what the council are saying in their version. The risk, I think, that having it relating solely, say, to the green belt in the final paragraph, is that it then opens up this policy as a precedent for other local plans and other representations made elsewhere across the country in relation to a mechanism for greenbelt release. So I would just, if it's solely related to greenbelts, I think it runs that risk. But those are my interviews.
Yeah, no, that's a point's very clearly put. I'll take the first one as an observation. I may come back to the second one, but thank you. David Hodgetts, did you want to raise anything, or was that superseded?
Yes, I just wanted to add one point, which is a matter which was discussed a few moments ago. It is regarding point B of the proposed MM35A as submitted by Mr. Best earlier. Obviously taking on board the comments of the council that they're happy to accept those documents being referenced to. I find it a little strange that we've got in bullet point A the reference to the West Midlands Strategic Employment Study and Area A, which is actually the source of where the need is established to justify this policy, and has been cited as the reason for introducing a policy because the need is there, and this is the primary document which establishes such. And yet that document, the key sectors that are identified within that need, within that document, and the subsequent document, which is going to be forthcoming hopefully very soon, aren't then referenced in bullet point B. So I think for soundness, if it were to reference, bullet point B were to reference specific documents, which I don't necessarily think would be the most sound appropriate approach, then I think it should at least reference the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study and any successor document.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. Now, I think I saw Mr. Rouse, your hand.
Thank you, sir. I shall be brief, as you've asked. It was simply, firstly, to confirm that we do agree with the policy put forward by Mr. Best, just so there's no ambiguity on that. And secondly, just to come back in relation to the point that Ms. Barrett was making when she was responding to your questions just now. And she was talking, and you asked a question, this was about the reference to LP3. Ms. Barrett, I think you've got the point on this, but I think it's worth just underlining that Ms. Barrett then said about it would come up in a tilted balance. Well, of course, the tilted balance only takes effect where the plan is out of date or doesn't specifically deal with the matter at hand. And I think what we'd otherwise be faced with if the policy is not clear, and I drew your attention to this policy in the NPPF 2012 yesterday, which is paragraph 154, and the requirement of the policy, which is a soundness point, of course, is that the policies of the plan are clear policies on what will or will not be permitted and where, and therefore it is important that where there is otherwise potential for a direct conflict between policy and the plan, as there would be otherwise, that the LP6A does deal specifically with that. And we must remind ourselves that the reason we're all discussing this policy is because we do acknowledge there is a need and the plan is not otherwise dealing with it. And therefore, that is the purpose of having it here. So I think it is important for soundness reasons in conformity with 154 that reference and specific weighting point to deal with LP3 is in the policy.
Thank you. That's very clear. And I think, although Mrs. Barrett will correct me if I'm wrong, that the reference to the tilted balance was perhaps not entirely what she meant. I'm a bit cautious about that. I think you meant in the balance of things, not necessarily applying the tilted balance, as sometimes that's used to refer to the presumption in favour of sustainable development.
Yes, sorry, sir. It's the planning balance I was referring to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Helpful clarification. Now, I will come back to the council. Thank you, Mr. Rouse. Let me just come to Mr. Sitch and Mr. Best. I'll then hear from the council, and then I would like to move on. So thank you, Mr. Sitch.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. It's Mark Sitch from Barton Winwell on behalf of Stowford. You've kindly sought the clarification I was seeking. Actually, sir, Ms. Barrett's just confirmed it's the normal planning balance as opposed to the tilted balance, which was also mentioned by Mr. Rouse. And just to confirm, Stowford's obviously support for MM35A, as we'll call it, as an iteration of the earlier 35 MM35. And just confirmation, sir, around the importance of Area A being the area of need, and actually in this case the area of greatest need, and hence we obviously support its inclusion in the policy, which we did back in 2018, and the need, we would say, to the last paragraph and cross-reference to LP3, the Greenbelt, to provide certainty and clarity to those looking at the plan now and in the future, and that goes to the heart of paragraphs 154 and 182 of the NPPF. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clear. Thank you. Mr. Best.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, just a couple of very minor points. Just picking up on the comments that Mr. Han made earlier. I mean, we've set out why we think those criteria are needed, and I think I'm just going to support what Mr. Sitch and Mr. Rouse just said, which is we've gone back to the NPPF and looked at the need for clarity, and this is a policy which is an exceptions policy. Therefore, it needs to do things that other policies perhaps don't do. I think it is different from the North West Leicestershire policy because North West Leicestershire didn't have any greenbelt, and because the majority of Area A is an area of predominantly greenbelt, then I think it's important that that significant weight is seen ultimately, as you say, in having to be balanced out in the decision-making process. But I think without that reference, we don't think it provides enough of a sound policy. And in the absence of it, I think we'd still object to MM35 as it's currently drafted. The very final point is Mr. Hodgetts just referred to the strategic study, of course, which is in criteria A, and how it should be in B as well. Well, I don't see any need for referring to it twice. The distinction between the two is in B, I'm referring to strategies, and the study is clearly an evidence-based document. It's not a strategy in its own right. So the study, in my view, contributes to the evidence of need, but the strategies are those which are setting out strategically what's important, and that's why we've added it into the policy, because we're trying to set an exceptional bar to what can be approved under this policy, and I think it's only right that to make it fact sound, that's what this policy should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Best. That's very clear, especially in terms of the function of the different studies. So thank you for that. Mrs. Barrett, would you like to comment at this stage? Otherwise, I think that's a very clear understanding I have now of the issues. What I would, I think this is essentially is getting to the point where it's over to me to have a reflect on this particular main modification. Now, it's no surprise that inevitably there are various iterations of main modifications, and I will consider what I've heard in that process. But before I do, Mrs. Barrett.
The only thing that I would like to say, sir, is LP3, if there is reference to that, it doesn't repeat what's in the NPPF about the Greenbelt. So if you are going to refer to the Greenbelt, is it LP3 or do you just refer to the Greenbelt? That's the only thing that I would throw out there, is because we've tried not to repeat the NPPF Greenbelt policy into the local plan, and we've developed on from that. But so if you refer to LP3, that doesn't quite match with the NPPF. So that would just be if there was reference to either LP3 or LP5 or whatever. I suppose LP5 is different, but LP3, because we've tried not to duplicate what's in the NPPF, then you'd have to refer just to Greenbelt policy.
I see, and I remember from earlier discussions on LP3 that there was no intention to diverge from Greenbelt policy on the part of the council, but I think, as I understand it, that's a point about phrasing, and it comes back to what we were discussing in terms of referencing national policy being consistent with it. Okay, thank you. Yes, I've got that point now. Mr. Hodgetts, I see your hand is up. I'll take that point very briefly, and then we will move on.
Thank you, sir. I will try and be brief. Essentially, the reason, one of the main reasons why I thought the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study should be referenced in Para B is if you go to the documents which are currently listed, the local industrial strategy, which I assume is the West Midlands Local Industrial Strategy, and the Strategic Economic Plan, which again we assume is that for Coventry and Warwickshire. The sum total of references to B8 logistics in both of those documents, I did a Control F, is 5 references. It's very little, and there's certainly not, to my mind, significant reference to B8 logistics use for it to be considered a key sector as identified in either of those documents. Given that this is a site within the Golden Triangle and past take-up rates of B8 are considerable, and one of the main drivers for this policy is the need to release floor space for logistics, and the fact that the local plan currently doesn't provide for any local need for B8, albeit it is touched upon in 2 of the allocations as ancillary B8, or in the case of Myra, the allocation at Myra, and in the allocation B2 west of Birch Coppice, that can come forward for B8. Given that at present there's very little allocated within the plan, to then have this document, this policy LP6 turn its face on the need for that use, I would seem to be very strange to me. But I may be completely wrong, and I would, if Mr. Best is clarifying that he thinks that those documents do, that one of the key sectors identified in those documents is logistics, I'd welcome that. But I could only find very few references in there to that use class. Okay, thank you. Mr. Best, would you like to respond on that? If not, I will be guided by what I have. But
thank you, sir. It doesn't need many references to be a key sector in a document. 5 could well be sufficient. The important thing is those are the strategic documents that the planning authority, and for that matter ourselves, have got to address. The study is clear on what it regards as the evidence of need. The local industrial strategy talks about there being a strategic programme to identify sites to bring forward to reference to meet that need. So I think combined with the growing importance of logistics in the current version of the NPPF and PPG, I believe there's sufficient there, and that's why we've included that criterion.
Okay, thank you. Points clearly put. Mr. Hodgetts, I see your hands up. Is that a legacy hand? Okay. Any last comments from the council, or else I'll move on to another potential main modification. Okay, thank you. Right, that's very helpful. Yes, I've got a fair bit to think about there, but thank you all for that. Now, if we go back my paragraph 69 of INSP 5B, and we will take a break in a little bit, but I just wanted to see if we can deal with, I have it down as MM45, which I should have really used my time more effectively when others were speaking to find that, but MM49 has been raised. No, I think this relates to policy LP9, affordable housing provision. We dealt with viability, the additional work the council has done in terms of viability previously on this. I heard from Catherine O'Toole in respect of one of the sites. There's an interaction with what is now said, I believe, in LP1, were it to be subject to a main modification in that respect. I don't believe there's anything I wanted to ask in particular. I think there was an issue about the... could the council, though, just talk me through the thresholds for affordable housing and the proportions? As I have it, 30% and 40%, although the version I'm looking at, I can't see reference to 40%, but that may be because that's in the plan rather than in the main modification. Can I just double check the council's approach there?
Yes, so it says now that all major developments will provide 30% of affordable housing on site, and in I've got my words all muddled up already. Will provide 30% of housing provided on site will be affordable, except in the case of greenfield sites where 40% on site provision will be required. And that's what it says at the moment. So it's all major developments. Previously, I think it was 10 or more units that was in the submission version of the plan. Yeah. And we changed that to all major developments.
Yeah, because there have been some intricacies with the wording, haven't there, of major. So okay, that makes sense, and there is reference, as we talked about earlier, in terms of viability. So I don't know if anyone wants to make any comments on that, but I think that's very helpful. Thank you, Mrs. Barrett, on that. Okay. The next point I have, and I'm just going through my list in INSP 5B, is MM36. Which, as I have it, is relates to various things, but the sort of type of housing, housing mix, housing type. Does anyone want to speak to that point? As I say, I've pulled these out from things I have seen mentioned. Now that MM30, potential MM36 changes the threshold which certain requirements for specific types of housing kick in, including in relation to self-build, and it also makes provision for various other types of housing. I did raise once that I wasn't sure that there was a definition there of special needs housing. I don't know if that is in the justification of potentially what types, but that's the only point that I would really want to raise, having looked through that one.
If we could take that away, sir, and we'll come back with some words. I think it's coming back to me. We were going to put something in the glossary. I think that was right. I mean, I think it could be taken to mean something very broad or something very specific. So yes, if that is possible, that would be good. Let me just quickly note that down on my list of actions.
Okay. Does anyone want to speak to that, or then let's move on to now the point of, I believe it's MM84, but there may be a number of people interested in this. From memory, and I'm just getting that in front of me, that relates to site H7, on which we've had a fair bit of discussion in terms of housing numbers and delivery, and in any event, there's potentially some clarification there in terms of the allocation number and the number that will come forward or are anticipated to come forward in the plan period. But the point, as I have it from a couple of representatives, is that potentially Who Hill itself, as opposed to the obelisk, which is grade 2 listed, is referred to as a designated heritage asset, whereas it's, as I understand it, that is relevant to the setting of the designated heritage asset, Who Hill, as opposed to being a heritage asset in its own right. As I have it, that is one point that's been raised. In fact, I think that was the only point I had raised on that. Can I just get clarification on that, Mr. Dittman?
Thank you, sir. Just for information, it has a wider potential than simply the obelisk. The obelisk, although it is a listed building, is theoretically, it isn't in actual fact, but it's theoretically the site of the, it's a former chapel, and it's a chapel relating to Ethelflaed's and the Polesworth Abbey's grounds. The actual site itself has been identified in the past as the Deer Park or the Hunting Lodge, so you may find the odd arrow and bit of horn on the ground. The actual obelisk site was on the chapel site, was found during the construction of the West Coast Main Line in the early 19th century. And the belief is that when the navvies found the site, obviously the remains were partially destroyed, and the obelisk was placed on the top of the hill to reflect the fact that there was a chapel or a former chapel on that site. Difficulty is it's not clear still whether the West Coast Main Line actually destroyed the site or whether the site is actually under the obelisk. So there's a little bit of historical judgment being brought in. But the site as a hill, as an area, and a former Deer Park stroke hunting lodge area is established. You also have a potential Neolithic quarry site just to the south of the obelisk. Again, that is a heritage asset. It's not an ancient monument, but it is identified for its Neolithic Iron Age potential. And there also may be some Roman relationships because you're not far from the Watling Street. And again, it is an area where they did dig for coal because it just happens to also be part of the North Warwickshire coalfield, as you're aware. So yes, don't get swayed by specificity in relation to the obelisk itself. There are wider asset issues. And when I undertook the calculation, and I think this is important to be aware of, I excluded a significant part of Who Hill as part of the 34 hectares or so I released from the housing calculation, specifically to enable us to give a wider setting protection to that obelisk. The intention always be that the master planning would look at that site primarily as an informal or a formal park, and hopefully that's the direction we go. I can't prejudge that, but that was the intention. I have seen suggestions of getting development a little bit closer, which does worry me a little, but there should be capacity within the site to enable that setting to be accommodated without significant damage to it.
Thank you. That's very clear. I think that's a very helpful background you set out, and I think the issue, as I see it, if I turn to MM84, is potentially it talks about assessment of the significance of heritage assets within the site and the contribution to significance with particular reference to. And in light of what you have been saying, I don't think there's any problem with saying particular reference to Dordon Hall, which is obviously listed, the obelisk, which is obviously listed. I think potentially the issue is Hoo Hill and its visibility and legibility within the wider landscape. Potentially someone was concerned that puts effectively Hoo Hill on the same footing as a listed building. But as you say, there are a number of sort of nested heritage considerations there. So I can't immediately see that that's problematic. But Mr. Sitch has his hand up.
Sorry, sir.
That's all right. Let's hear from Mr. Sitch, as I may be scratching at things here.
Yes, thank you, sir. Mark Sitch from Balmoral, respect of the Church Commissioners for England. I think in answer to your question there, sir, as a matter of fact, Hoo Hill isn't a heritage asset, and therefore I think we need that reflected in the policy. In respect of the helpful references from Mr. Dittman, they're provided for in relation to the policy in terms of the archaeological work that is proposed. And therefore, I think there's a distinction between what is a heritage asset and what isn't a heritage asset. And I think in respect of potential heritage beyond the listed obelisk, i.e. the Hoo Hill, that's covered by the provisions the Council have set out in the policy requiring archaeological investigation. So, hope that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Dittman, I hope you heard that. You were showing us your fine arts and crafts tie at that point. I think it was a point from Mr. Sitch regarding just the clarity in terms of what Hoo Hill actually is, and that's not to say, as I think you made the point, it's not valuable, but whether it is in itself a designated heritage asset.
That's correct. So, yes, I did catch that. The obelisk itself obviously is a designated heritage asset because it's a listed building. The other areas I made reference to are non-designated assets. They are referred to in various archaeological documents, but in their own right, I agree and I accept they are non-designated heritage assets. However, I would make reference to the heritage impact assessment that we undertook, that land use consultants undertook, where particularly the settings issue, both of the obelisk itself in an individual circumstance, but also the setting and views from Dordon Hall. That was a particularly contentious issue in terms of the character and setting for the hall itself and its outlook, predominantly looking north and east. And that was a significant concern, if you recall, both by the occupants of the hall in terms of their objection to the policy, but also to English heritage and the reasons why we had to do that additional work. You may not agree with all the findings of that, but those views and settings and across to those two particular heritage assets, the obelisk on Hoo Hill, which is a non-designated asset, and Dordon Hall, which again is a designated heritage asset, I think were very key important elements in that assessment that should be basically reflected in the policy in some way.
Thank you. Yes, and now may I just come back to Mr. Sitch? Were it up to you, MM 92.7, which is the one we're particularly discussing, would that read assessment of the significance of heritage assets within the site and the contribution of that setting to significance, full stop? Particular reference should be paid to Dordon Hall, the archaeological remains, the listed obelisk, Hoo Hill, and visibility and legibility. Would that work?
Thank you, sir. It could work, but I think it's potentially misleading, as I think you would read the first sentence of 7 in the context of heritage assets. And I think you'd still associate the Who Hill and its visibility and legibility in the wider landscape as part of that context, if I've interpreted your suggestion, sir, correctly. I think it would drop out of the list and ultimately be part of the appropriately staged programme of archaeological mitigation.
So we've got that feedback, I'm afraid. Again,
Sorry,
no, it's not you. It's our systems. They seem to talk of their own accord. But I'm just wondering if then the core of the dispute is simply in relation to Who Hill, and whether in itself that is categorised as, on the one hand, a valued landscape. And if I go back to the NPPF 2012, there's clearly something in, I think, paragraph 108 in terms of valued landscapes. There doesn't seem to be any dispute that it's a valued landscape. But the dispute seems to be, at the risk of sounding like I'm running a hearing, which I am, but in a different context, you know what I mean? But is the dispute effectively whether it could, Who Hill could be in itself classified as a non-designated heritage asset? Is that the real issue, Mr. Sitch?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Gotcha. Mr. Dittman.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I do understand the concern being expressed by Mr. Sitch. I just would reiterate that maybe not in a physical format. The hill itself is interpreted as a separate non-designated asset. Maybe that's me being too expansive with my ideas. Nevertheless, within Who Hill, you have a designated asset and a number of potential non-designated assets, including the former quarry, the Neolithic site, and the fact that the land, which includes the Who Hill and is wider than Who Hill itself, was part of the former Polesworth Abbey Deer Park and was where the Lady Abbess and Lord used to go a romping. So the difficulty, sorry, sir.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that in a session on MMs. But,
in theoretical terms, as well as in actual terms on documentation, if you go to the county's website, as a whole, that was where I was coming from, as a non-designated asset. But again, I would reiterate, from the setting of Dordon Hall, the relationship of Dordon Hall and the views out to Who Hill were critical issues that the various heritage officers, both ourselves through land use consultants, obviously English Heritage raised that as a concern, in particular regarding the setting, but also I think, and I might be wrong, that some of the concerns were raised because of past appeals and past concerns, not just with H7, but with other sites within the allocations, including particularly H2 and H13, where the long distance views from assets or from non-designated assets was of concern. So, for instance, if you would take the Merivale Hall, the Merivale Abbey, the park grounds, and of course the church and nearby listed buildings looking into H13, which within itself is similar to Who Hill, has some non-designated heritage references, but in itself is not a designated heritage asset. And this is the buildings and the agricultural complex that you referred to earlier. Sorry, sir, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. What I would suggest is that then, because on the basis of what I've heard, there is some historic significance in the round to Who Hill, But whether or not it is classed in itself as a discrete entity, as a heritage asset, I'm not really in the purposes of a local plan examination going into that. But what I want to do, obviously, through this policies provide an appropriate framework. What I would simply suggest, because this is a detailed discussion that could potentially be the subject of many PhD theses down the line. How about just for this point on this assessments of the significance of heritage assets within the site and the contribution of setting to that significance. Particular regard should be had to Dordon Hall, archaeological remains, the listed obelisk, Who Hill, visibility and legibility within the wider landscape, regardless of their particular status.
I'm happy with that, sir.
Maybe not regardless of their particular status, but maybe recognising they have different statuses. Mr. Sidge?
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes. I'll say yes. Thank you, sir. The wording is helpful. I think that bullet, Who Hill, and its visibility and legibility within the wider landscape, I think could either appear at the end of 7 as part of the informing the master plan and design process, or as part of 8. But I appreciate
right.
So to make it clear to those looking at the policy. But
okay, thank you. Yeah, well, I'll put that on my list of actions. We'll come back to that. But I think something like that, so that it provides an appropriate framework at a plan making stage, and then down the line discussions can be had about the specifics. Okay, I would like, unless anyone has any other comments at this stage, Dr. Doggett. Yes, Dr. Doggett. Let's hear them now, and then we'll break in a bit.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, I just wanted to pick up really the last sentence of MM 84. Again, I know I'm speaking here again as a layman, where it says that all of the description of the infrastructure and things that will be provided on H7, which is MM 84, it then says subject to and having regard to viability assessment. Now, to me as a layperson, that almost trumps everything that goes before, because if it's subject to a viability assessment, then all the things that are listed earlier on about the provision of retail and health facilities, the provision of comprehensive transport arrangements of footpaths and cycleways, primary schools, if all the things which, including what we've just talked about, the heritage thing, if it's all subject to and having regard to a viability assessment, it feels like that can trump everything and be a reason why none of those things could happen. And I'm just asking, and I appreciate whether the word subject to has to be there. I realise that it has to be, like the NPPF says, it has to have regard to viability, but the word subject to is very powerful. It means that it sort of trumps everything. So I'm just asking really whether, and taking the NPPF 177, where it talks about it's equally important to ensure there is a reasonable prospect that planned infrastructure is deliverable in a timely fashion. I just wonder if there's some more balanced way of saying, obviously viability is really important to all these plans in this MM, but the word subject to is very, well, to me as a layman, feels very powerful and almost means that there could be all of those things could not happen. Any particular of those things could not happen if it was decided it was not viable.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, I think I remember Mr. Sitch explaining just on that point that there had been some viability assessment work, and certainly in terms of affordable housing, he said that the requirement under LP8, I think of 40%, seemed to be achievable. But setting that aside, what about, and this is where I might suggest something, and I take that point that it's very valid that subject to, if you see that, say, at the end of a contract, it does make you raise your eyebrow, doesn't it? Subject to X, Y, and Z. Perhaps that could, reflecting NPPF paragraphs 177, 173, as Dr. Doggett has said, with regard, instead of subject to and having regard to viability assessment, with regard to viability if necessary.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds more balanced.
Well, I mean, it's and Mr. Sitch has said that at this stage, although things may inevitably change as they do in life, but there's no foreseeable issue in terms of viability. So that's the if necessary part of that. Mr. Sitch, can I get your view on that?
Yes, thank you, sir. On behalf of the Church Commission of England, we're content with that wording. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Barrett, I'm conscious I've been suggesting things left, right, and centre and haven't given you opportunity. So.
No, I just wondered whether that sentence is actually required at all, because in LP1, I think it is, we talk about the viability of the infrastructure and the viability of development to deliver the infrastructure. So, and yes, there is a big long list there, but equally you could go back to LP1 and read that and talk about the viability. So I just wonder whether you could just strike out subject to and having regard to viability assessment completely. But I'm not going to die in a ditch about it, so.
Okay. I've never understood the origins of that. Okay, let's. I think probably my indicative view is, given that there's not much between everyone, given that the H7 is a big phased site, there is no harm in putting implementation of various things with regard to viability as necessary. Although I agree, Mrs. Barrett, it potentially simply replicates broad provisions of LP1. I can't see that that's harmful here. So, I mean, I think probably let's go with that. So, thank you. I will put that on my. Right. So. That brings us on the agenda to MM97, and we will break in a second. But I just want to see, does anyone want to speak to that point? I'll just get MM97 in front of me. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Was this not what we talked about in terms of the historic farm buildings? So we've addressed that, haven't we, in terms of the retention, if possible, but if not, reflection.
No, sir. That's a similar circumstance, but a different policy. That was H13, I think, which is the Baddesley Enzo New Road site. This is the Manor Farm, Newton Regis, which is a slightly different situation in that there is an immediate heritage asset on the site, although that's not part of the development. But that's not factored into the actual allocation. It's more to do with the redevelopment of the site, which includes both heritage and designated and undesignated heritage assets, which I think we have made reference to in MM97 under H24. That's in the first sentence. And I just checking. Yes, I think this is coming from some of the concerns that Historic England had, particularly in regard to, again, it's the setting and the implications in relation to new development to that historic asset. And I don't know if Dorothy's got any more on that.
Yes, it's so ALP 34, I make as Natural England, and they are referring to the nature recovery networks in LP 16. Right. Okay. And that's what we talked about yesterday, and saying that we would put a section in there. So I'm not aware that there's anything in relation to MM 97 unless.
Okay. No, thank you. I think that may be an error on my part. It may be that I've cross-referred as I did to it in that statement in terms of heritage assets. So, okay. The other point I have is in relation to policy LP 25, which appears to be a point raised by Prologis.
If I can quickly say so, I do think it is that we've got our English in the wrong order.
Is this a point of clarification, or?
It is, so it's about the transport assessments, because I forget about what exactly the wording is in the plan, but it should be appropriate to the scale of the proposed development. Because I think we said that it should be the scale of the transport assessment should be appropriate to, or the other way around.
Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, no, it's just a clarification on that point, and that equally may have arisen because of me, or because of the council, or because of version control. I'm not entirely sure, but that's kind of the council to say that there is an issue there just in terms of clarity. So I'll put that on my notes. Okay. So the other MM that stands out in my mind is the potential trigger for when a local plan review is undertaken or considered. I know the council were going to look at that. I know there is perhaps some discussion needed on paragraph 70, any other matters including consideration of the sustainability appraisal work. There were some points raised about right-of-way equestrianism and farm diversification, which I can cover off in brief. I would propose to come back to those points after a reasonable break. Is there anything that anyone wanted to raise at this stage? Anything that I haven't enabled you to? Dr. Doggett.
Yes, I apologise. But talking about, just wanted to, in MM16, which I missed when, I mean, it was finished before I realised, but I wanted to ask whether, in the case of H7, the three green spaces that were there at the beginning of the plan, I understand it, the Holliswood and the two other green spaces, have now been named, I think, by the county council as wildlife or nature reserves. And so I just wondered if there could be a small change in MM16 where it says create linkages between green spaces and wildlife corridors, where it could have create linkages between green spaces and wildlife sites, because currently the green spaces in Dordon now are only two relatively small areas, the Kitwood Park and just on the edge of the Meaningful Gap. Those three big areas were green spaces that are now wildlife nature sites, and I just wondered for clarity whether we could just insert the words create linkages between green spaces and wildlife or nature sites because the wildlife corridors are for animals, and I think part of the MM16 should be suggesting we still want to have linkages, not just between the green spaces, but also linkages between the wildlife nature sites. So I wondered if maybe just add some words to create linkages between green spaces and wildlife nature sites, as well as wildlife corridors.
Yes, I mean I can see the logic of that. There's a growing body of evidence in terms of the coherence of ecological networks. I can understand that. Sorry, I was just struggling to find that particular point, sorry, that particular reference. But any points from the council on that?
Yes, sir. It's on page 6 of the set of modifications that I have in front of me, and it's the 6 bullet point down. It's create linkages between green spaces, and I just wonder whether we put a comma wildlife sites and corridors, so that it's clear that it is sites and corridors, because then that would refer back to the nature recovery networks and all of those as well. So unless of course we just refer to them, but I think because they're still developing, it'd be probably best to just keep its green spaces and wildlife sites and corridors.
Yeah, that sounds logical.
Yeah, it was because in other places it has been pointed out that Hollieswood and these other places are important for the human population as well as the wildlife population, and that the linkages therefore are important for the human beings as well as the wildlife.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hodges.
Hi there. So I may have misunderstood you. Were you inviting comments in relation to what's been discussed so far this afternoon before we break, or were you just in relation to what's been spoken most recently?
No, it was any comments in terms of what we've gone through so far. I would like to take a break and then come and address anything else, but it was up to this point. If, as say Dr. Doggett did, he said, "Oh, I wanted to raise a point in terms of MM16." If there's anything that we've covered thus far that you would like to comment on, brilliant. If it's something that's new, we could have a break and come back to it after that.
Well, I may as well say it now then, sir. It's in relation to MM35 and the discussions that we had earlier, and I see that everyone's who was partaking in those discussions is still on the call, so that's helpful as well. It's just quickly to say that we will obviously be preparing, or we have the version that Doug was, Mr. Hand, sorry, was contrasting with the version of MM35A, which was provided by Mr. Best earlier, and we will be submitting that to you in due course for your consideration in due course when you come to it. The second point was just a quick response to Mr. Best, who made the point that the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study is mentioned in paragraph A of his wording of MM35A, and therefore doesn't need to be repeated in paragraph B. I think there's a clear distinction between paragraph A, which sets the area across which the strategic sites can be identified, i.e. area A, whereas paragraph B clearly serves a separate purpose, which is to identify the key sectors which will be suitable to come forward within said strategic employment sites. So there's a key difference there. So by referencing the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study in both in A and B, it's not repetition, it's serving two different purposes. And I would go on to point out that the West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study it establishes the need upon which the second phase of the report has been conducted and upon which this policy is based. It doesn't just establish a need for large sites. It breaks that down into various sectors manufacturing and highlights especially the automotive industry, but then goes on. And I would give you a reference here, sir, at paragraph 4.86. It states that retailers and third-party logistics operators are the other major drivers of demand, and that's in reference to Area A specifically. So I think it clearly is a document that not only establishes the need, it aggregates it into different key sectors, and therefore and we're using the Area A as the reference point for the geography. It would seem strange to not reference the report again in relation to the need per se. But Mr. Lever, who was actually a contributor to the original West Midlands Strategic Employment Site Study, may be able to explain it in much better detail than me, and I see he's just put his hand up. So perhaps if you're willing to do so, he could recap in much more succinct terms, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I know I see that yes, it's about defining to what that would relate. No, I understand that, and I'm very sorry that for some reason I appear to have turned orange, but there we are. So, Mr. Lever, would you like to explain that in a bit more detail?
Well, yeah, hi. David Hodgetts has done all the heavy lifting, really. There is a very clear reference in, yes, I was involved in this study, although, it seems many moons ago. JLL were joint authors with PBA, and we provided the market intelligence to the study, and it is very much a market-based study. But there's a very clear reference, actually. David gave you one, but paragraph 6.5 actually in the conclusions gives you an even clearer steer, because that actually sets out the areas where there's a particular planned where the land supply is considered to be severely short, and Area A is identified. But then they identify in paragraph 6.5 the particular sectors where demand is coming from, and I'll just read it out. And it says logistic operators, the best travel times to the UK population as well as access to multimodal facilities. And secondly, to manufacturers and their suppliers in terms of proximity to the main automotive facilities. So those are the key drivers. So I would agree with Mr. Hodgetts. I think if you are going to keep referencing criteria B to various strategies, I think it's important to reference that study in that criteria in that particular sense. Because it would be a shame if this policy, sometime down the line when all these discussions are forgotten, that actually the key driver to strategic sites in this part of the West Midlands is actually large-scale logistics.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's very clearly put points. Okay. I'm not sure. I think I will take those as points. I've written some notes down because there will be the further opportunity to comment on that, and I've said I need to go away and think about that potential main modification. So unless there is anything further, thank you very much on what we have gone through so far during this session. We will break now, come back at 4:30, and we will deal with the last, as I have them, 2 or 3 points, some administrative matters where I will look through what I've got in terms of actions. Any other matters, so I know we want to have a quick talk about sustainability appraisal there and a few other things, and indeed any other main modifications that we haven't yet addressed that anyone particularly wants to raise. Okay, so let's adjourn now. We will reconvene at 4:30, when we'll discuss those things. So thank you very much. So don't, unless you want to, don't leave, just turn, as you all have done actually, your microphone and your video off. Thank you.
We should be on channel, sir. I've just been told the word is streaming, sir.
Okay, good. Well, it is now 1:30, and that's very convenient, as I was invaded by little people earlier. So thank you very much for all being here. So we are now looking at let's reconvene and go to INSP5B, that document on the examination website. We're on paragraph 70. Now, the first, I've got a list, I did it in the break, a list of administrative points, many of which relate to potential main modifications. The first point I wanted to address here, and this may be something Mr. Rouse wants to mention, or it may be someone else. But certainly in the additional local plan consultation, I did ask specifically that the additional sustainability appraisal work that the council undertook at my request, looking at different levels of household growth, be mentioned in that consultation process. Now, does anyone want to speak to that point, the additional sustainability appraisal work? I've got Mr. Morrison. I have the representations of IMP in terms of how it addresses or does not address employment growth and different levels. Mr. Morrison, yours is the only hand I can see up, so let's go to you first. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Yep. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to raise this issue. Yes, so well, in brief, sir, yes, the point we wish to raise is not with respect to the housing growth, although housing and employment provision are linked to a greater extent. Essentially, sir, what we still have concerns about is the soundness and compliance of the SA, particularly with respect to assessment or lack thereof of reasonable alternatives for employment growth. Now, so it's been very helpful to listen to this afternoon session discussing min modifications, in particular MM35. I think has been mentioned, MM35 clearly it's in there and being considered and proposed because there is a need for strategic employment. And I know that my colleague Mr. Best and others have in previous sessions, I believe yesterday morning, discussed the clear demand for strategic employment. With all of that said, sir, that evidence, we believe that the SA, and I'm sure there will be further SA work, I guess, sir, to assess the main modifications. We believe that there should be an assessment within there of a reasonable alternative for the provision of strategic employment land, sir, high levels of employment land than that's currently allocated in the plan. In brief,
okay.
Sir, thank you.
In brief, thank you. And that was commendably brief. So, from your perspective, just to be clear, the SA process has looked at various different options as we've gone through, but from your perspective, that is flawed in terms of its consideration of reasonable alternatives in terms of employment. And how, in your view, would that be resolved, or is it even capable of being resolved?
Thank you, sir. Well, we've been making this point to be honest, sir, for the very outset and before the examination through discussions with North Warwickshire. Effectively, sir, the concern is primarily with the lack of an alternative for the provision of the quantum of employment land. We do have concerns over how the assessment of the spatial strategy options has been undertaken, but so primarily with the provision of employment land. I believe, sir, in previous sessions, again yesterday, the figure of in terms of what quantum floor space is available is down to some participants put it down to 1.8 years, sir, and that the current take up is 20 hectares. So, as a suggestion, plan for 5 years, 20 hectares a year. We believe the SA could assess a reasonable alternative for the provision of high levels of employment land totaling 100 hectares. And that is above the land that would represent a very good level strategic site, sir, and that would be a good place with which to start and include in the revised essay work.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much. That's very, very clear perspective. Now, if I can turn to the council. Now, if I can take this in 3 parts potentially. The first part is the council's view on that in general. The second part is there is a reference somewhere, I believe it's the Employment Land Review update, to the eventuality that all the employment land in North Warwickshire that has come forward since 2006 is taken, and that is forecasted forward in terms of employment land. If that reference would be hugely useful because, and we have talked around the specificity of this figure, but the 20 hectares a year has come up on occasion, and we've just heard from Mr. Morrison that he is of the view that a reasonable alternative would be consideration of 20 hectares a year, which gives something like, over the 22-year plan period, 440 hectares of employment land. Can I ask the council for their view, for their points on those 3 matters, please?
If I take the last one first, sir, in terms of the reference, I was going to say it was CD8/7, the addendum to the Employment Land Review, but to be honest, that's what I've got on my sheet of paper, but I'm not sure if that is actually correct. But there is a range, and I did write it down somewhere on my notes. So,
let me have a look as well. CD8/7, did you say?
Yes. Sorry, I was looking at another document. There was, it's a range that they predict forward between 212 hectares to 400. I think it's 400 and something hectares, and that's what's predicted forward, taking account of all employment sites. And I do apologise. I did have the record.
No, that's all right. I'm searching for that as well. It would be good to it would be good to find that reference now, if possible. I'm looking as well. Just bear.
CD8/8
is it 8/8?
That's the Employment Land Review from GL Hearn.
Yeah, but it's the particular reference to that 212 to 400. I think it's or the 20 hectares per annum. It's that reference, because I think that one just does the housing growth, doesn't it? It doesn't do. No, it's not that one.
Okay.
I found it the other day. Come on.
I think I may have found it.
Oh, well done, sir. Thank you.
CD8/6, Employment Land Review. It seems that 212 figure is there in paragraph 7.41. It may be that.
8.6 in that.
So I'm just going to the inspectors one first. Yeah, and then it was 8.6. Yeah, that's the one. Yes, sir. It's reference to the paragraph 8.6. The forecasts provided indicate that to support the level and nature of employment forecast, there's a demand for between 212 and 410 hectares of employment land, and that would be based on all of the employment and based on the various ways that they calculated it.
Okay, thank you. So roughly, although there is some difference of 30 hectares, the suggestion by Mr. Morrison that 20 hectares of employment land per year would be a reasonable alternative that should have been assessed. With reference to that document CD86, what's the council's perspective on that? Is that a reasonable alternative?
But so if you go to 8.8, the council should make provision for the delivery of between 70 hectares of employment land over the planned period to 28 in order to support local economic growth. And so we had the addendum produced, which was the update of that to take it forward, to roll it forward. And so from our perspective, that was what we were planning for. And so it was the alternatives within those scenarios rather than something that was it's a nebulous number, so to speak, because if you see with the growth options that we originally started the plan process with, they were for all development types, and we went through that, and that was part of the process as well, that we looked at the range of options as to where we were going to put development and things like that, and then gradually it gets honed further down, and then it was to the quantum of development. So the range of the quantum of development was up to that the 100 hectares mark, as far as I can recall, sir.
Yes, and we've discussed this previously, and there was some discussion in terms of the correct figure that should be attributed to Coleshill Hall Hospital, which I know you're going to have a look at. But if I can summarise those points, there is AD 54A or B, which now is a comprehensive list of everything that has occurred in terms of employment land since the start of the plan period. And the plan requirement, we're now sort of coming up to midway through the plan period, but the plan requirement is around 100 hectares. So in total, that comes out as somewhere just under, well, around 250 hectares, I think, does it? Somewhere around that figure, combining those two. So that is somewhere in the range, if you calculate it in that manner, and the different ways that you can calculate it, but if you calculate it in that manner, that's somewhere in the range of 212 to 410. Is that right? But from your perspective, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so tell me if this is not the case, looking at the upper level of that threshold would not represent a reasonable approach. Is that right?
That would be my opinion, sir, yes.
Okay. So back to Mr. Morrison on that, because his hand's up.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Ms. Barrett, for the response. Sir, so just to clarify, I suppose, in terms of what the figure is, the point I would like to make, and we make the reps, is that is only the local need. The evidence is clear that there is a need for strategic level employment sites within this M42 corridor, and certainly within North Warwickshire. So I think my view is that it would have been entirely reasonable as part of the assessment for employment land to consider alternatives that goes beyond the local employment need. And the figure that I suggested, so, was one that I understand from my colleague Mr. Best was discussed yesterday, is that there is the market take-up at the moment of 20 hectares per year. I'm not necessarily suggesting we go as high as 440 hectares, sir, but perhaps one could say in the first 5 years of the plan, 100 hectares is a reasonable figure based on market take-up. So again, it is the local authority's view to come up with reasonable alternatives, but I would have thought, with all the evidence and the fact that we have considered MM35, that there is a need, an SA of a growth option to provide strategic level employment would be a way to make that SA sound. So
I don't know if this will help, sir, but as part of the main modifications, there will be an essay on all of the policies that you have before you and your recommendations. So all of those would be part of a formal essay process that would then be part of a consultation with the main modifications. So I'm not sure if that helps, but that will be part of the process in the next stages.
Yes, well, that certainly does help in terms of process. I think Mr. Morrison kept his comments commendably brief, given that we have discussed this a few times, and I've seen a lot of evidence on this from different perspectives, and I think that now falls to me to consider. So thank you for that. Mr. Dittman's hand was up, but there was one point I wanted to raise, so I will come to you, Mr. Dittman, but just in terms of, we talked in terms of housing sites, of the process that has been gone through in terms of the strategic housing land availability assessment, the sustainability appraisal that informed ultimately a site allocations plan, which moved into the local plan. Are you, Mrs. Barrett or Mr. Dittman, able just briefly to talk me through the site selection process in terms of employment provision in that sort of history, because presumably a sort of similar process was gone through in terms of employment sites. So that would be useful. Thank you.
Yes. So in terms of the employment land, the SLA was both for residential and employment, and I think at the time we put also the request to have any gypsy and traveller sites to be proposed as well. So it could propose any sites, and it was those that were taken forward into the SA process and taken through that way, sir.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at the sustainability appraisal for site allocations, just to which is examination document CD31. I'm just having a quick look. Sustainability appraisal findings for the employment sites is under section 6. And I can see that there's been a consideration 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sites. Okay, that's section 6. Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's everything I wanted to ask on that. I've certainly heard that perspective. Mrs. Barrett clarified how the process goes forward. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Unless anyone wants to speak to that, I'm fully aware of those issues insofar as I've heard them. Mr. Dittman.
Sorry, sir, it was just a minor point of clarification. As has been referred to by Mrs. Barrett, you have the SA of the employment sites identified through the LUC work, but also obviously that arising from our approach where we undertake the SHLA, but we cover not just housing, but also, as you said, employment and Gypsy Travellers potential, where that came forward. Part of the issues that makes this a difficult issue to address in SA terms is simply the lack of identification of these sites. We have a difficulty not only in the amorphous figure, 100 to 400, but we also have no specific cited areas designated and submitted to us as part of the SHLA. Now, that may be a result of that, but it is difficult to... Oh, I'm just being asked to... To make a reasonable alternative, taking the housing approach, you have to have a site to look at to suggest as a reasonable alternative. If we didn't have a significant number of reasonable alternatives submitted, we can consider the potential need, but I struggle to see how we could assess an alternative if we didn't have a site to assess. Do you understand what I mean, sir?
No, I see that point. Yes, yeah. Okay, Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to come back very briefly on that one. I'm not so sure you do need to have a site to address a strategic need for a reasonable alternative. That's where policy making, I would suggest, might start. So from an SA perspective, if there is evidence to demonstrate you have a high housing or a high employment need, then you develop some alternatives, policy options to deliver said housing and employment need. And then if the SA identifies that there are significant benefits from providing a range of housing or employment needs, then you can then drill down to start to identify some sites to provide that need and the consequent sustainability benefits. So, and I think, again, the need for the strategic employment site is there. So it is quite reasonable to see that there is an alternative to assess. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was listening intently, but I was also having a look at the guidance insofar, the planning practice guidance insofar as it related to matters of sustainability appraisal, the version insofar as it was relevant to the NPPF 2012. So thank you very much. Is there anything, I don't know if Mr. Morrison, you wanted to add to that? Your hand's still up. If there's not, I'll go to Mr. Morrison.
Yes, sorry, sir. Sorry. Just again to clarify on Mike's point about Mr. Titman's, I beg your pardon, point about submitting a site. On behalf of my client, IM, we did submit area around Junction 9 as a potential reasonable alternative for a strategic employment site. So the council has had that evidence from us to demonstrate we think it is a credible alternative. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Titman, any final comments on that?
Sorry, sir, no for the final comments beyond. We did look at the SA issues on the growth options where that element was taken. Though I do accept from Mr. Morrison's point, they did submit that particular area, but I think that had been superseded by the obviously assessment undertaken on the growth options. But yes, I do take his point.
Just for reference, the SA and the growth options is CD 6/7, just for reference.
Thank you. Just one point I quickly want to explore. Sorry. Just okay. Thank you. Okay, so that brings me on to, that's all very clear, thank you. That brings me on to any other matters, which is paragraph 70 of INSP 5B. We've considered sustainability appraisal processes, and I will take a view on that. There were a few other points that came through the additional local plan consultation. One was consideration of how equestrianism was dealt with, including in respect of equestrian uses and farm diversification, and how rights of way were dealt with. Now, having looked at that, and I'm not sure if anyone is here to speak on those. I would say that I clearly see the points that have been raised, and were any of those individuals here, I probably would have just talked through those matters and dealt with whether something goes to soundness or not. Clearly those points are well put, but just on including reference to equestrianism, to matters related to rights of way and to farm diversification, in light of anything that's come through the additional local plan, does the council consider that any modifications might be required to the plan in those respects?
I think just for clarity, so it may be well worth just referring to that we do, because I think we do say all modes of travel, and of course that would be horse riding as well. But that would be the only thing that I picked up on, because in terms of farm diversification, we do have an awful lot of stabling and equestrian facilities throughout the borough that have been allowed and being promoted. So I don't see that there is a particular issue there that we perhaps need to address as part of soundness.
Okay, so from your perspective, whilst there may be valid points to raise, they don't necessarily go to soundness of any of the policies, and there may be opportunity to clarify certain points, but not in the terms of a main modification. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And also, I was going to direct the British Horse Society, who made the comments, onto the County Council, who are producing the local transport plan. So because the public rights of way would come under Warwickshire County Council, and I think a lot of what they're talking about is actually the maintenance and the running of those, the public rights of way. So I was going to put them in touch with those.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's a very helpful clarification. Now, I didn't, in terms of the substance of our discussion, I didn't have anything I wanted to raise in addition to that, apart from to go through the various administrative points that I've got listed. Before I do that, any points, I hope everyone feels that I've given them fair opportunity to say what they wanted and to contribute to the discussion. But if I haven't given anyone the opportunity to say something, now's the time. Please do stay during the session while we go through the administrative points and raise any matters after that. But any points at this stage? Okay. So let me first go through what I have in terms of actions coming out of today's sessions, if I may. So the first one, and there are 14 today, there were 13 yesterday, and 11 on day one. So we're broadly in line. But the first one is consideration of the trigger for when Reserve Housing Site 2 should come forward, if in the eventuality that the option 2 trajectory, as the council have amended it in line with my earlier thoughts around the 2015 SHMA, how that would occur. And that that links into a broader point about, I believe, is it MM7, which is early review, which we talked about yesterday. Now, I know, given the pressures of the days at examination, the council probably haven't turned to that yet. But I think there is some clarity that's needed over where a trigger for an early review would occur in relation to certain things occurring with the housing trajectory, and indeed with reference to potential new policy LP6 and what's happening in terms of employment provision relative to the monitoring data there. So I know that will come, and there's inevitably a bit of toing and froing in terms of main modifications, so we'll work that out as we go, but that's just to flag that up again. And I know the council was going to consider I've forgotten the name of the other plan.
It was Bedford Local. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We've been sent a copy of it.
Okay.
And just so that you're aware that we'd still prefer not to have a review policy, but if there was to be one, we'd rather it be based on evidence rather than it saying within 4 months we have to do X, or within a time period we'd like, because I think it depends when that evidence comes out and things like that will then actually trigger a review. If you were minded to have a policy, although as I say we'd prefer not to have one, and that would be based on our track record. Really?
I think the way the discussion was going, that trigger for early review and what is meant by a sort of a significant change would be triggered by some form of monitoring data. So there'd be a clear point in the plan where, if say future housing provision dips below a certain level, or future employment provision dips below an anticipated level relative to what the requirement is, that trigger would be engaged and require a review of the plan in whole or part. And I see that the police there in the background were making representations reminding me that there was something there about emergency services in another main modification. So I think that covers that point. Thank you. The second point I had, although that actually covered a number of points, but the timings in NWBC 26C, the council undertook kindly to ensure that those were correct as of 2018-2019. Now, any additional information that comes out in subsequent monitoring periods, put that on the website. But insofar as the plan is concerned, for consistency, the data as we have it is correct in all those instances as of the 2018-19 monitoring year. We don't have further data in some respects, so that sounds good there. There was a commitment given to just clarify, and I'm not sure this is a matter of soundness, but it potentially goes to the effectiveness. Allocation H7, there is an amount that is anticipated to come forward there, but an amount that is anticipated to come forward within the time lifespan of the plan, and that relates to MM94. So that would be good to clarify. The next point I had, there is an unconsented part, approximately 3 hectares of site H18, which the council have explained has been through the sort of comparative assessment of sites relative to others, and was an allocation initially as part of H17, but then I suggested that those sites with planning permission should not be allocations, but should just simply reflect that they're part of supply. However, that leaves 3 hectares, which is potentially unaccounted for, access issues bound up with RH1. I think the council were going to clarify how that whether that 3 hectares becomes in effect a reserve site, or whether it is linked to RH1. and that again has a linkage to how those sites, their status, and how they are considered in terms of the plan type as it goes forward. This is potentially one for Mr. Dittman to save the amount of paper that Mrs. Barrett is using. LP27 railway lines. There was, I know you're going to look at, consistent with the description you gave, whether the word potential use in the future should be included, just to reflect the intention of that policy. Again, I'm not sure whether that is or is not soundness, but that's one to consider. We talked about how the Greenbelt boundary should be represented correctly in respect of H14, that site, i.e. the council is, as I understand, proposing that site is no longer in the Greenbelt, and therefore the policies map should be consistent with that. We dealt with Greenbelt issues in an earlier session, and indeed site allocations. So that is just a point of clarity, I think. The next point would be to check if site allocation H3 is correctly referenced in NWBC 26C, NWBC 26C being the trajectory of sites. It may be, and I haven't looked at that during the break, but it may be that it's still in there as an actual allocation rather than as a reserve, which is what the council now propose. So yes, check that one out, make sure it's not incorrectly counted. The next point, with reference to heritage, there was a historic farm complex to which reference should be made to retention or, if not possible, replacement, given that I have representation suggesting that retention is not possible. I forget the number of that site. I can look it up in my documents, but I'm sure that will mean something if for the council. No, it's all right. There's no need to clarify that. It's I can look back through my notes.
It's H15, sir.
H15. Thank you. That's
you.
That's above and beyond. But thank you very much. The next point, that with reference to the new Dipsey and travel accommodation assessment, a policy LP6 should reflect that there is a requirement for a minimum of 19 permanent pitches, that there is a site allocations development plan document in train, correct references to travelling show people, and to monitoring indicators. I think those latter 2 points are just for consideration, as much for me, for my notes, as for the council. Mr. Dittman, you kindly agreed to source 2 recent traveller appeals, and the one in 2015 at Annesley, I think, in relation to the implications of the 2015 Coventry and Warwickshire Strategic Housing Market Assessment. Those may, certainly one of them may already be, or certainly in May, that doesn't make sense, but one of them may already be on the examination website. But if those could all just be checked and put up there, that would be brilliant. I will have a look through in light of everything that's been discussed. Potential MM35, which is the one around potential new policy LP6A. Now, we had a very full discussion on that in terms of Area A of the West Midlands Strategic Economic Study. So I will have a look at that based on everything that I've heard before we sort of go on to the next stage. There was some minor tidying up in terms of site H7 regarding the clarifying of different statuses different things that are currently referenced within that policy in terms of Who Hill, Dordon Hall, listed obelisk, and otherwise. And also, in response to Dr. Doggett's point, with regard to viability as necessary in criterion 12, I think it was of that. And again, another point of just tidiness, as I had it, some clarification of the phrasing related to policy LP25 and transport assessments. So at that point, is that everything that anyone has, or are there any points that I've missed? As I say, some of those issues, the process is inevitably not straightforward. Some of those issues may be soundness if they go to affect how a policy will operate. Some of them may not be, but nevertheless, as a precautionary approach, probably best to set them out and then to consider them as we go. But yeah.
Excuse me, sir, I've just got a few other ones, but they'll probably be covered, I suppose, but they're to do with MMs.
Okay.
So I don't know whether in MM16, actually delete the reference in the NPPF.
Ah, yes. Quite right.
Then I've got MM36, LP7, the reference to special needs. Just that we put something into the glossary, but I think we already have something, but that was seen as a minor amendment.
Okay.
Or like an additional amendment, and that might be already in a different list. So we might already have that.
Sure. And just on that point, as and when you get towards a kind of a list of a schedule of main modifications that takes account of everything we've discussed, and some are additional modifications that you'd obviously like to make and don't go to kind of affect policies in any significant way. I mean, do send them through to me so that I can have a look at both, because as everyone knows, very small words can occasionally mean big things in planning. So that would be fantastic. Thank you. Mr. Dittman,
it's just possibly a couple more. So obviously referring again back to I think it was MM16, but arising from H7. That was Mr. Dockett's reference to the wildlife sites and corridors, additional text to be added in. That was MM16. In LP25, again, this issue of clarity on the text, where the term scale, appropriate to the scale of the proposed development, we needed to check that had been done. I think it has been done, but I do recall Dorothy saying we would go back and check, and that's in LP25. I've still got a note on the WMS ESS, but I think that's up to you, sir, to determine one way or the other. And that was it, sir.
Okay.
I just have one other. Sorry. I just have one other, sir. It was that listing of the A5 and making sure that in the infrastructure list of projects that we made sure that the A5 was listed. I think that was one for this morning.
Oh, that was one this morning, was it? Okay.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. No, I had that. I had that somewhere in my notes, but yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, that's all very clear, and hopefully those little sessions at the end of the day have been relatively useful in setting things out. And I found it a bit easier actually working on a computer at the same time for that. But no, thank you very much. Right, in terms of administrative actions, administrative points and going forwards. So a lot of that rests on the council to consider. Some of it, because of the stage we're at, is modifications to modifications. Some of it is, I think most of it though is relatively small scale compared to where we've come so far. So thank you everyone for your contributions and work in that respect. As ever, as I said at the start of the examination, any conclusion, my report is with the council. I have written in the past following hearings. I don't feel like there are any particular points I need to explore further on this occasion. That's not saying they won't necessarily crop up, but at this stage, I think the next part of the process would be for the council to reflect on those points and to pass to me a list of main modifications to those effects, along with updating the website, so that's all clear. Going forward at some point, and main modifications will need to be subject to sustainability appraisal, and will go out again for consultation. But I mean, we can't be certain on that time. But if I can ask the council when they think they could get a version of main modifications to me, and that is with painful acknowledgement that the world is in a very strange place at the moment, and we're coming up to a time of year where progress is quite hard. But just as a rough indication, if that's possible.
If at all possible, sir, we'd like to get that to you as early next week as we possibly can, if not before. But we would certainly say by as early next week as we possibly can. Okay. LUC, the consultants for the SA, are on standby. They have already blocked out some time in January to update the SA. So we've got everybody in the stalls waiting to go, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, I'm around for part of next week. I think is Christmas on Friday. I don't know. Yeah, I'm struggling to keep track. But no, I'm around for certainly the start of the week. So that's fine. No, thank you. Okay, and then inevitably there'll be maybe a bit of toing and froing, but it looks like we've got a good basis there for going forward with. Main modifications, certainly getting those nice and clear. So, yeah.
If I could just say so that our offices are actually closed between Christmas and New Year, so that would be the only issue there that we are physically closed. Right. All right.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and you know I appreciate and that yeah, it's. Not the most full-on time of year, but no, great. Okay, thank you. I said I would be quiet at some point and leave room for anyone to ask any procedural questions, but I've come to the end of everything I wanted to discuss. Are there any questions, any points, anything I can respond to? Okay. No, just checking. No, well, thank you all, and thank you again to the council and to the programme officer for sorting everything out. I think that worked very well and was very useful for me. So at that point, I will then adjourn the hearings. I say adjourn, but that's what it is. But thank you. Thank you very much, and we will see how we go with those main modifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Hearing's closed.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.